I learned a lot and saw a lot when I was working the overnight shift at the Taco Bell in my town. We had one of the Taco Bell locations that would close the interior of the restaurant at around 1 a.m., but the drive-thru would be open all night long. It was a pretty simple job, especially since for the most part, after 2 in the morning you only had to deal with a few customers. And for the most part, the customers were pretty cool. But there was one interaction that I know I'll never forget. That night, there was only myself and one other person working. He was doing a lot of the cooking while I cleaned the restaurant for the morning shift and took in orders on the drive-thru headset. It was probably about 2 in the morning when this customer first came through. He had a fairly simple order, so we got him all set up and he came through the window without any problems. We talked a bit while I waited for his food to be ready, and I remember him asking me how many people we had in there right now. And I didn't think anything of it, so I let him know it was just me and my manager. But by that point, his food was ready and he drove away. No big deal, right? Wrong. 20 minutes after he pulled off, someone else set off our drive-thru notice, and I began talking to them through the headset, asking how I could help them today. And right away, I recognized the guy's voice. I was curious as to why he would come back so soon, especially since this time when he placed the order, it was only for another drink. I told him to pull up to the window and I thought everything was going to be fine. But as soon as his car pulled up, I noticed he wasn't alone. He had 2 other people with him, and when they got to the window, the passenger and the person in the backseat began to get out of their car. I got a bad feeling about the situation right away, so I proceeded to close and lock the drive-thru window, which is when they began flashing their pistols at the window. And I know the glass isn't bulletproof, so I was going to open the window. It's not worth getting shot over. But as I reached to unlock the window, one of the guys must have thought I was reaching for something and he pulled the trigger 4 times. I didn't even feel it, but I knew I had been hit when I heard the 3 men outside the window panicking before I heard their car tear out of the drive-thru lane. I looked down and saw blood beginning to leak through my shirt. I fell to the ground clutching my torso. Everything around me began going black, and the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, and almost 3 whole days had passed. The police didn't have any luck finding the guys who shot me, and my coworker claimed that they didn't even try to take anything after shooting me. According to the police, the shooter most likely didn't mean to fire his weapon, and when they did, all of the perpetrators panicked and fled the scene as fast as they had arrived. It was the second security job that I had ever had, and at first I was loving it. The job was to work the night shift in an apartment building that was currently in the process of being renovated by new owners. The reason they hired security was to make sure that no one was squatting in any of the empty, rundown apartments. And if I'm being honest, it was really a simple job. My shift typically started around 9 p.m., and I would work with one other security guard. We would take turns walking each of the floors and making sure that all the doors were secure. But other than that, we practically got paid to spend most of our night just hanging out in the lobby and watching the few cameras that were laid out around the building, most of which were focused on the doors leading in and out. For the most part, it was really simple and relaxing, but there was a few incidents that put both me and my coworker Sam on edge. It all started when Sam came back from her walkthrough of floor 5 one night, and she told me that she could have sworn she heard someone walking around the halls, but when she checked, she saw nothing. After that, almost every walkthrough we did, one of us could swear that we heard things, whether it be walking, creaking, or sometimes even the sound of something banging against the wall of a room. Anytime we checked it out, there was no one to be found. We started to joke with one another about the building being haunted, but that was just to lighten the mood after anything creepy happened. It wasn't until about 2 weeks after we started hearing noises that I had confirmation that someone was in the building with us, and it was just my luck that it happened on the one day that month that Sam had taken off of work. I began doing my first walk through the building that day, and as soon as I got into the stairwell, something in the back of my head told me that I wasn't alone. But I figured I was just jittery after all the noises that were happening, And since I had been alone, I was just a little bit more on edge. I made my way through the first, second, and third floors without any incident. However, as soon as I began making my way through the dimly lit hallway of the fourth floor, I began to hear footsteps. I kept looking over my shoulder as it sounded as if the steps were coming from behind me, but every time there was nothing there. I made sure to check every room on the floor thoroughly, and to my surprise, there was still nothing to be found. I tried my best to put the noises in the back of my mind and continued on with my walkthrough. I made it back down to the lobby and began relaxing when I practically fell right out of my chair. I had been looking at the screen on my desk, and I thought I had seen movement out of the corner of my eye near the stairwell. And sure enough, as soon as I looked up, I could see what was clearly an adult male staring at me through the doorway of the staircase. I jumped backward in my seat, knocking myself over, and practically fell right onto the ground. I scrambled to get back to my feet, but by the time I looked back at the stairwell, that man was gone. I took off after him, and I could have sworn that I heard him running up the stairs and then through the door onto the fourth floor. But by the time I had gotten there, the man was nowhere to be found. I called the police, and they did a thorough search of the building but came up empty-handed. Honestly, for a minute I felt like I must have been seeing things, but I know for a fact that there was someone else in the apartment building with me that day. And for the next week or so, Sam and I made sure to run our walkthroughs together so that we always had backup. But to our surprise, there weren't any signs of the man that I had seen, and the strange noises had also seemed to stop, at least for a little while. It was only around 9 days after the first sighting that Sam and I ended up having another incident. The two of us just started our shift, and we were getting ready to do our first walkthrough when all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like someone yelling coming from upstairs. Now, it didn't sound like screams coming from someone in pain, but instead sounded like someone yelling very aggressively. The two of us looked at each other, and then we grabbed our radio and cell phones before going to check it out. Sure enough, the yelling that we heard was coming from the fourth floor, the same floor that I had followed the man onto the first time that I had seen him. Sam and I made sure to be careful as we stepped into the hallway since it was very poorly lit, and we didn't know what to expect. And sure enough, as soon as we walked out of the staircase, the yelling ceased. Sam and I both listened closely in hopes to finding out where the yelling had been coming from. And both of us nearly turned around and ran back down the stairs when the man began yelling at us directly. "You won't take me home," he began to yell. "Neither of you." Sam and I looked at each other before I responded. "Sir, we aren't here to hurt you. Please come out so we can talk." We waited for a moment, but there was no response. There was no verbal response. But Sam tapped me on the shoulder before pointing to one of the rooms on the left of the hallway. We could clearly see the door beginning to crack open before something flew out of it toward us. I heard the sound of something small hitting the wall next to me, and when I looked on the floor, I saw what looked like a small dart of sorts. Sam and I didn't say anything to each other before we both took off running down the staircase. It wasn't long before Sam was on the phone with the police station again, and they had units heading our way. This time, when they got there, I decided to wait in the stairway for them to make sure that the man hadn't had a chance to escape. And Sam was watching the cameras and all of the exits. As far as we knew, the man was still on the fourth floor. The police arrived and they made their way up to the floor and headed straight for the room that we had seen the dart fly out of. This time, the man made no attempt to hide or escape. As soon as the police knocked on the door of the room, he opened it and turned himself in. The police officer that Sam and I spoke to seemed very concerned for our safety and asked us if either of us had ever met this man before. We both said no, and when we asked why, the officer informed us that the man was likely going to lure us both into the room he had been hiding in to kill us. They found multiple knives in the room with him alongside multiple large garbage bags and 3 plastic tarps. That wasn't all though. On this person, the officer said they found a tranquilizer gun along with 3 darts that had been laced with a strong sedative. To this day, we still don't know why we would have been targeted. In the summer of 2002, I found myself working at one of the gas stations in our town, and more often than not, the owner would put me on the night shift, which I was not fond of, but I needed the job, so there wasn't much to argue about at the time. I did put my foot down after an incident occurred that caused us to call the cops and got us slightly involved in a murder investigation. And after that, I was never put on the night shift again. The problem came at around 11 at night when I was the only person working in the store, and I saw a man walking down the sidewalk. It looked like he was going to come in and buy something, but to my surprise, he seemed to stop in the parking lot. I watched the man from the window of the gas station as he appeared to be looking around for something. It's hard to describe it, but his movements looked like he was some sort of walking zombie. He was half hunched over, and with every step he took, it almost looked like his arms were twitching. I thought about checking on him and asking if he needed help, but right before I could bring myself to do something, I noticed something that shook me up a bit. What I originally thought was simply a red pattern on his shirt was now glistening under the streetlights as if it was something that was wet. And the more I looked at it, the more I noticed that his hands and fingers were also covered in this red substance. Right away, I knew something was wrong. And considering that I was alone in the gas station, I decided my best option would be to lock the door. I walked around to the corner and went over to the door to lock it. And just at that moment, the man in the parking lot happened to look over at me. I continued locking the door and bolting the floor lock as the man began to approach the glass. As he got closer, it was clear that he had been covered in blood, some of which was even on his face, but none of it appeared to be coming from him. I reached for my cell phone and began calling the police as the man began to press his face against the glass door. He began slapping his hands against the glass as he yelled in some sort of incoherent language. The police assured me that they were on their way to my location, and I made sure to stand far away from the glass. About 30 seconds before the police arrived, the blood-covered man reached into his pant pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife. My eyes widened as he began to fold open the blade and then press the tip of it against the glass. The man began to let out a sinister laugh, and it looked like he was getting ready to wind up his arm and smash the glass door once and for all. Lucky for me, the police ended up pulling into the parking lot before he could do so. The man turned and faced the two cars that pulled up, and they were immediately at a standoff. Thankfully, the police managed to tase the man before he could hurt anyone and arrest him. But get this, things got even more serious the next day when the police came in to question me about what happened. It turns out before coming to the gas station, the man had taken some sort of drug that made him very belligerent. He then proceeded to murder his girlfriend and her older brother in the apartment before walking down the road. He told the police that he had been possessed by demons and that his God told him that he would find more at the gas station. I don't know what was going through his head. All I know is I've never been so terrified in my entire life.